Welcome to the Write the Docs podcast number 19. We are well and truly adults, depending which country we're in. But anyway, let's not go there. Welcome to the show. We were due to have a guest, but we're not entirely sure if we're having some time zone issues or something. So we're just going to go with recapping some Write the Docs related events and see what happens. We're going to improvise. So how is everybody first? Let's just do a little round of intros. Let's start in the future. How are you, Mr.?
I am all right. I am sort of recovering a bit from a cold that I got, I think, last week when I was doing the MC gig at WTD Australia. So I'm a bit croaky, but I'm okay.
I highly recommend, and this is now becoming standard conference merch, hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer, right? Yeah. Yes.
People are now starting to give that out instead of t-shirts, and I'm very pleased.
Branded hand sanitizer. I like it. Yeah.
All right, and let's go back to post-Thanksgiving stomach aches, hangovers. How are you, Tom?
This has been great. This Thanksgiving weekend, it's been kind of pretty mild and not too crazy, so it's been very enjoyable. One thing we did do is we went down to Monterey Bay Aquarium down here. It's like an amazing aquarium. If you ever come to California and you travel down the coast, you definitely want to go stop at this thing. It's like mind-blowing. Anyway, other than that, not a whole lot.
And strangely, this year, so there's a lot of Americans in Berlin, actually. And so we get a strange amount of Thanksgiving here, which you wouldn't necessarily expect, more so than in the UK or Australia. And for something that we hear a lot about, I've never really known what it actually represents. We just get told about it, but we don't really know what it is. And I actually had someone at a party on Friday explain to me what it was about. So that was what his opinion anyway. So that was kind of nice. And I got to go for a very subtle or not so subtle transition here. And he kind of explained to me it was about giving thanks for freedom to express opinions. And then what those opinions were have changed throughout history. But let's go with that before we get too political. So I'm going to go for a very subtle segue here. And we're going to talk about people's freedom to express their experiences in conferences. Yeah.
That was slick as. I love it. Yeah.
So let's actually start with a recent one. Write the Docs in Australia. I was there last year. We did a very brief recap, but Jared, you were there this year. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet you. I didn't come, but tell us a bit about your experiences there.
Yeah, so this was the first Write the Docs official conference that Swapnil decided to organise. And the last year's one was a Write the Docs day. And this one was the full-blown conference, 2-day program, schedule of speakers, Unconf, lightning talks, the full shebang. And it was really good as a maiden conference. We had feedback from some people that suggested that they'd been to some conferences that have been running for about 5 years, and they weren't as well run as this one was in its maiden year. So that's a pretty good result from that. So it would happen in Melbourne this year, and it was in this really great complex right in the Docklands area of Melbourne, which is I guess a gentrified area of Melbourne that was just literally just docks before.
There's a lot of stories about Docklands, actually. It's been a little unsuccessful, and they keep trying to push people to go and move there and stuff. So it's a weird place.
Lots of apartments, and everything closes about 10:30 at night. It's really weird. So yeah, they have this really, really neat library right on the dock area down there. And it's this public space, and it's like this multi-leveled library, and it's such a fantastic venue. They've got a coffee shop downstairs, which was getting rather slammed with 105 people's coffee orders at morning and afternoon tea. We had to end up doing what I dubbed in my introductions as coffee as a service. So we had to take everyone's order and then get the coffee just delivered upstairs. because it was ridiculous. They could have had 10 people on, and they just would not have actually kept up with the demand. It's a real problem at conferences. Getting coffee right is really hard, right? Have you been to a conference that actually gets coffee right, Chris?
Yeah, but they tend to be the minority. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It's yeah. Go, Tom.
Jared, I'm curious about the unconference format. It seems like at Write the Docs conferences, the unconference track is kind of a very common pattern, and that distinguishes Write the Docs a little bit from other types of conferences, at least other tech conferences. Can you tell us a little bit about like the approach and the format of the unconferences? Were they completely spontaneous, where people go to the conference and they think, oh, I'm going to lead a session, an unconference session on topic X? Or were they kind of prearranged that a certain person would host a discussion about that and this person prepares a little bit, but nothing formal? How did you do that?
It's a very interesting question, actually. So I opted to actually stay in the more traditional streams in the afternoon, because traditionally the unconferences tend to happen in the afternoons. And I opted to stay with a couple of the workshops that people are doing. But I did talk to the other organizers, and we, of course, you go and put your name up on the board about what you want to talk about. And to answer your question, I don't think there was a lot of pre-preparation from people. I think people, like in the morning of the first day, we didn't actually have any unconference sessions up. We actually had Nicola Nye from Fastmail down here. She's on Slack, and she had to actually seed the board with some topics to get people, encourage them to actually put some stuff up. So the whole first row was basically her, and we're saying, so they're all really good talk. Proposal ideas. So we were going, we need to clone Nicola and get her to do 4 sessions at once. But that did encourage people to put other ideas up. And I think what happened with the unconferences was it sort of, they evolved. They were just like, you know, you go to some meetups and you have a roundtable discussion about things, and you start off with a particular topic and then they evolve into something else. I think that was happening quite a bit with the unconference sessions. They were sort of starting on one topic and then ranging into another one. But I think in the most cases, they were kind of keeping with the same theme, sort of, that was being discussed or that was tabled with the unconf. But I saw a lot of what a lot of people were doing were they were furiously taking notes. And I know Nicola was saying, geez, there's just been so much information. I caught the tail end of one when I was calling everyone back into the main room. And she was going, oh, there was so much information just, you know, told then. I had trouble writing it all down. So it sounded like, even though they're a little bit unstructured, you get to learn a lot, because the beauty of unconference sessions like that is they evolve. And I think that's what makes them so attractive for people perhaps who are new or who are just, you know, wanting to sort of find out new information about things. They're less structured, and because of that, they allow for more information flow.
I really like the unconference format, and you mentioned that they evolve, and I think that's what sort of draws me in, because if the initial group leader or whoever is kind of leading the discussion, if there is one, isn't going in an interesting way, as a participant, you can redirect it, you can shift things, you can make it evolve to fit what you're interested in and engage. And in my mind, the unconference format perfectly captures the purpose of a conference, which is to confer with other people. Whereas a lecture mode, a straight static presentation, seems a lot less based in the confer idea. I don't know, Chris, what do you think about unconference sessions? Do you like them, or do you prefer more traditional presentations, or maybe lightning?
It somewhat depends on the event, obviously, and then the people attending the event. But quite often, I do find that the main track tends to be the inspirational / maybe safe, maybe broad interest talks, and then in the unconference you can get a lot of just random stuff. And sometimes it'll have no interest to me at all, but sometimes you have an opportunity to get to someone who's brimming with enthusiasm on something obscure or not obscure or just they're passionate about. I actually do, and sometimes you have the birds of a feather ones, which is somewhat similar, and often I'll find that those tracks of a conference are sometimes my favorite. Yeah, I do tend to stick in those more, I think, especially as I go to a lot of events, and sometimes the same rhythm of talks gets a bit similar. So the Unconference is a little bit of a point of difference sometimes.
I've seen these unconference sessions be approached in several different ways. There's the straight spontaneous approach that you mentioned, where people come and they write the topic on the board and then they just execute it. Two other approaches. There's an event around here called TC Camp that has a bit different approach, where people throw up topics on a piece of paper, and you'll have maybe 60 pieces of paper with topics. People put stickers on the topics they're most interested in, and then based on the most popular ones, they divide up round robin type or round tables for discussion on that topic at different slots. That tends to work all right. In a big room, it's hard to hear sometimes, and you kind of need. I mean, it's hard to manage from a physical facilities point of view when you have like 5 groups all talking at the same time. Another approach at the last Write the Docs Portland, or maybe I didn't go last year or the previous year, they sort of had people who committed to give an unconference session, and they were more committed in terms of preparing a discussion, having a rough outline of points, maybe a short, like 3 to 5 minute kind of presentation at the beginning, and followed by the discussion. And that worked well too, because sometimes, if it's just completely spontaneous, you put a lot of risk in the thing falling flat, right? It's like, I think from a conference organizer's point of view, you may think, well, is this gonna take off, or is this gonna just like suck? It's like, it's got to be
right.
A lot of pressure.
It really comes down to the strength of the people attending and what they can bring to the sessions, which is both its strength and its weakness. I think, though, from the perspective of the Write the Docs Australia conference, they went really well. One thing that's definitely true, though, Tom, is that it was very noisy. And on the second day, we had to actually split the rooms out to one upstairs and one just outside, because we had this sort of green park space outside. So rather than keeping everyone indoors, the weather was nice, so we just went outside and had it downstairs, which everyone seemed to enjoy.
It was very hot last year, I remember. So
No, it was pretty good this year.
Yeah.
No, it was actually good this year. But yeah, it is quite challenging to separate the noise. You almost need to have like sound barriers between each of the tables, because yeah, it does get really hard, especially for people with some hearing difficulties. It makes it quite hard for them to actually participate. We had one person there with some hearing difficulties who made a point of actually saying, look, it's really hard to actually hear what's going on, which is why we pivoted and went downstairs. That's a really interesting thing about, I think, Write the Docs conferences in general. They're very adaptable from the perspective of meeting the attendees' needs. We found there was a problem with the coffee, so we worked out a system to solve it. We found there was a problem with the unconferences, so we just solved that as well, and we just rolled with punches.
I think that's a somewhat seemingly a fairly Australian personality trait too. I wouldn't mind coming back to that in a minute, actually, on something around the community. But let's just so you had 2 days of solid talks, and also including at least one international speaker. I can see someone actually should get on the show because she's in the same time zone as Tom. It just occurred to me. I don't know why we haven't had her on. Yeah,
Jessica, or very thorough, as she's known on Slack.
Yeah.
That's
but
right.
Come on, cards on the table. What were some of your highlights?
Okay, so there was one. So I will say that Jessica's session on static site generators surprised me. I thought that, I kind of also, because I was doing the MC stuff down there, I felt that I need to stay in the main track just to make sure that that session stayed on time, because I would have got lost out in the Unconference sessions. I would have just probably had a hard time keeping on track. But so I did opt to stay in the main sessions, and Jessica's session on static sites was really good. And the reason why it was really good is because it was wide reaching. It gave you a really interesting history lesson on how web presentation technologies evolved from, essentially they've gone full circle, but they've shifted a part of the processing to earlier, is what they've done with static sites. And I really found that a really, really nice overview for people who perhaps were new to static sites. It was just a very accessible way to introduce the concepts. So that was great work from very thorough there. The other presentation, we had this theme this year at Write the Docs. It seemed that there was a lot of support people there. So people from, the help desks. And
that's actually, I think there's a reason for that. Australia and New Zealand has traditionally had a big support industry because they're English speaking, and American companies can cover the 24-hour cycle in 2 shifts.
We follow the sun, sort of thing. Yeah. It was definitely a big thing in Red Hat when I was there. Like they had a very big support backplane at Red Hat Brisbane. So we did have a fair few both formal talks and lightning talks from people who were helping people do better. And one of them, we had 2 maiden speakers there as well, which is another thing that's wonderful about Write the Docs conferences, is that we support new people actually wanting to have a go at presentation. And the folks that attend Write the Docs are always supportive, and it's a great way to debut your speaking career at a Write the Docs conference. So we made a point of telling them I made a point of telling everyone that this was their first talk, and to really make them welcome. And it was great. Like you could just see in their faces when I was introducing them that it was like, oh, all the pressure's off, sort of. I was starting to give the talk, but the expectations being set. So one of the maiden talks was on the subject of it was how to enable. Oh, that's right. It was documenting yourself when you start in a job, and it was like those first 2 to 3 weeks. When you first start a job, you have more questions than answers, right? And
making yourself redundant on day one. That one.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yes, yeah, that's the one. And that presentation was really good. It reminded me a lot about some of the jobs I've been in the past, where you just jump in and you start documenting things internally first, because that's the lowest hanging fruit that you can get, right? And it's the easy wins that you can get on the board and show people you can actually write in some cases, because I've been in some organizations where people go, well, what is a technical writer even? So it's good to show them what that is in the form of just writing stuff quickly like that. So that was a really interesting talk as well.
Jared, so you remember a few podcasts ago, we had Eric Holscher on, and we were asking him kind of like, how do you handle this proliferation of events, proliferation of Write the Docs events, and still maintain the Write the Docs brand or culture and experience, even when you have all these new people coming in and creating Write the Docs type events? Was that something that you as an organizer thought through and said, how are we going to capture the unique spirit and experience of a Write the Docs event? Did you say no to advertisers? Did you do like a writing day beforehand? Did you do a hike, or like what did you do to make it resonate with Write the Docs culture?
Yeah, no, I think the good thing is that as part of the conference sort of general package that you get if you want to run your own conference, there's a lot of stuff that's already predefined for you. So there's a kind of way of setting up a conference based on the lessons, the hard-fought lessons learned of other conferences. And I'll say this as a caveat: I wasn't actually involved in organizing the conference. That's well and truly Swapnil's arena. I was really down there just to be the face of the conference as the MC. So I didn't do a lot of organizing. I just herded the cats, which there wasn't very much herding to be done, perfectly honest. It was incredibly well organized. I had a very easy job from that perspective. But yes, there's a lot of resources available to you to keep it on brand. Like there's even like printables that you can print out to actually set the tone, like for the toilets and all that sort of stuff, to make sure that, you know, expectations are clear about inclusivity and all that sort of stuff. So it's easy from that perspective to keep it on brand, I guess.
Did you have a writing day beforehand?
No, we didn't have a writing day beforehand. We opted to go for the 2 days just to fill them with as many presentations as we could, and just go down that path. But we did have a workshop with Sarah Maddox for a bit of Tech Writing 101. So that was I attended that one, and I was going, oh, it's always good to, you know, sharpen the axe a bit, particularly as I've been out of the game for a couple of years doing the product management side gig. And I thought, oh no, I'll go along to this and see what I can learn. And the biggest takeaway from that session was there's so many right ways of doing things. Because we went through the exercise, we partnered up with somebody, and we did a quick rewrite of like a couple of paragraphs each. And there wasn't essentially a wrong way of doing it. The work, everyone had a different approach, and they were all good. But it just shows you that, you know, there's so many different ways of conveying the same thing. Or the same concept over and over again, that it's why you need things like style guides and that sort of thing to align the other people in the business.
That sounds cool. So she had you, like, all the participants rewrite a same passage and then compare the differences.
Yeah, it was being Write the Docs. It was a safe place. So we all felt comfortable actually speaking up about it. About the way we've rewritten something, and some people's approaches were like, I guess, from a personal perspective, better than others, but they weren't wrong either. So, you know, it was great to see that. That's the biggest thing I got out of it, is the fact that, you know, there's so many different right ways of doing things, or so many different ways you can approach a problem too. And that was the other thing that was very interesting about that session.
How did you keep the costs of the conference down in line with the low costs of the North American conference in such an expensive place like Melbourne and other areas of Australia? Like, was that something you had to kind of get creative about, or like how much was the conference?
The conference, I think, was about $130 or $150 for the 2 days, which is very, very reasonable. That includes your food, which was catered, which is ridiculous. Like, you'd spend that much in Melbourne just on food anyhow for the 2 days. Wow. We actually, depending where you go, of course. But, you know, it was, I think in part, we really did, we needed to thank our sponsors, because that's what actually kept the show accessible from a cost perspective. We had some big name sponsors come on. Google was one of them, and, you know, there was a list of sponsors that I covered in the introduction. Without the help, it would have been a lot more expensive to attend. And that
hasn't this been the dilemma that Eric has faced? How do you keep an event low cost while also not letting sponsors come in and sort of take it over? Like, how did you limit the amount of time sponsors got to kind of project their message while also getting them to still sponsor?
I found it to be interesting. Like, there was you could see that there were people there. I mean, I think Very Thorough was there on behalf of Netlify, which is a sponsor. But the thing is that it's all about the quality. Like, they can be there and they can do a very, very small pitch in their presentation, which is what it was. It's like, hey, I'm from Netlify, you might like us. And then they went on with the, you know, with the thing. It was the thing I found, even with the vendor presentations, even though they were clearly vendor presentations, I still learned something from them. Like, it wasn't so much that they were like just a massive advertorial. There was one that was a talk by Mike Hamilton from Madcap, who's a big sponsor of the conference, and his was about responsive content and the difference between media queries and Flexbox. So he had like maybe a slide in there, or he mentioned he was wearing a Madcap Flare shirt, and that was literally about it. Like, it was not a vendor presentation, and that's the thing. I think they screen them quite carefully, but we always have like a prominent page with all the sponsors on it, so everyone can see who's actually helping out. And I think they get to put some stuff in the bags as well, so they get to put some merch in the bags. So I think that's how the balance happens, and it worked well. And I think from the sponsorship perspective, there was certainly, I mean, I didn't hear any complaints. Maybe Swapnil has a different perspective on that. Maybe that's something we do differently, but I don't want to speak out of turn. I felt the balance was good.
Jared, you're basically just suggesting future guests. I don't know why we haven't had one either.
No, Mike's a great guy to listen to. He's an excellent presenter, and that session for me was really interesting because I've been talking about Flexbox with one of the head UX guy at CreditSense, and he gave me an overview of what it did. But geez, Mike's presentation really laid it out, and what a cool technology that is. So that was a really, really cool talk. I was going to say, all of these presentations are available on YouTube.
Yep, they're all online already, which is very quick too. So here's a question. Let's feed off of that. So, and I say this as a card-carrying Australian myself. I have to. It's right by my desk because we went and voted in the state elections on Thursday. So down the embassy in Berlin, which is always kind of weird.
It would be.
So, I mean, the event has officially only run for 1 year, but sort of unofficially for 2 years.
Yeah. And
lots of active meetups too. So if we look at the European event, you know, Europe is 500 million people. The US is, I don't know, 200-300 million. Pretty big too. They both have 300 to 400 to 500 attendees. Australia has 20 million attendees, and you said just over 100.
105, yes.
Which seems like overrepresentative versus the population. Why do you think the community is so strong? I mean, I must admit, when I was living there, I wasn't really involved that much in the tech writing space, but I don't really recall bumping into it very much. So is it a new phenomenon, or was it just something that needed a voice and that voice has emerged? Or why do you think the community has been so successful?
I think the reason why the conference was so successful is it had a lot of pre-work done. So Swapnil has literally flown around Australia, I think maybe with the exception of Perth, which is right over the other side of the country, to actually go and spread the Write the Docs message in meetups and get those sorted out. And now we've got a meetup in every city pretty much. So I think because we've had that brand association with Write the Docs, like the fact that there was a conference running and the strength of the speakers and presentations made it like people went, well, yeah, I want to go to this. And I think the Write the Docs Day last year was really successful as well. So that's whet everyone's appetite for a conference. And there was actually demand for it, which is why this conference was actually, we took it to the next level because people love the Write the Docs Day so much.
Well, so, what you mentioned that Swapnil flew around to different cities and kind of built up this interest. I mean, it would be nice if Swapnil were here. You know, maybe you should have him on a future show. But what do you can you speculate on what contributes to the making of a super volunteer like Swapnil? How does a guy like this get so like into delivering this whole experience? I mean, he's not getting paid for it. Like,
no, it's certainly not getting paid for it. And it takes, I don't know, it's a certain type of individual that will actually go out and put so much time into something like this. The motivations behind why, I couldn't tell you, but we're very thankful that he's done it. He's an absolute legend. And he is the thing, I think, to be a person who sets up a community like this, you kind of have to be pretty selfless with your time. That's probably number one. You have to also be driven very hard to actually want to get a result, and you might have to actually break down what results mean as part of what you're trying to set up. So you must have a long game that you're actually playing to, and I think it also helps once you've actually got the momentum going. I think what happens is then the community, like Write the Docs, takes over. We people just step up. And I don't know if that's just something, I don't think it's something that's just unique to Australia, because I see it all over the place. With Right the Docs meetups and stuff, there's new meetups springing up everywhere with people just going, you know what, I want to continue with what Right the Docs sort of fundamental sort of, I guess, ethos is all about, and then just go with it myself and do something that will benefit the community. I think that's probably what it actually drives from, really. It's just benefiting the technical writing community in general. And Right the Docs gives you that framework to do that, I think.
Part of me is a little skeptical inside that super volunteers won't eventually burn out unless they find that they're getting out a lot, that they're getting out as much as they're putting in. Like, I mean, think back to the original days of Write the Docs. I think Eric Holscher was devoting a ton of time into this, and then realized that he had to kind of distribute and have more of a sport of other people handling, I don't know, some of the other events. They even hired some people to help run some of the conference events. I just wonder, like, you know, will Swapnil continue to drive and lead so much of the Write the Docs events in 5 years, 10 years? You know, at what point does somebody say, it's too much, I gotta pull back and focus on
I would actually
something?
say one thing that the Australian community has that we've struggled maybe with some other areas is, whilst Swapnil does do a lot, there's actually a lot of people in each city who also help. And that's always been the biggest problem I found with people who tend to be, they will get burnt out and they can't do everything. And a community needs to be more than one person anyway. This is the most successful open source projects and community projects are the ones where the leader can step down and they can still keep going.
That's right.
And that's actually a rare thing. But yeah, I think that might be one of the differences, because I know other groups have struggled with this. Like, one person is very enthusiastic, they get busy or whatever, and the group kind of stutters because, yeah. So I think actually having other people who help you is certainly important. And I know that happens in all the cities, because Australia is big. You can't keep going from city to city. So,
yeah, that's right. There's only so many hours you can spend in the plane. And, like, you know, Swapnil was funding it himself too. Like, he wasn't getting comped by his company that he worked for or anything. I mean, he's a freelancer. So, so you know, it's there's a cost there. I think he's actually got more of a full-time gig now, but he was certainly, when he was setting it up, I think he was going between a couple of contracts. So, you know, that adds extra stress to it as well, right? So, yeah.
All right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. Yeah, I was going to move on to some other things. So you just wrap up then, Tom.
Just a closing thought. I think this same dilemma you can observe at the chapter or at the meetup level as well, right? Where you have a super volunteer that's organizing and driving meetups and planning events and getting venues and food and speakers and, you know, doing everything. And then how do you distribute that load of work without you know, always doing it all yourself to avoid the burnout. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that we could learn from the Write the Docs Australia event and apply it even outside of conferences to meetups. So that's all.
So yeah, the interesting thing for me, I guess, was in closing, like, this was my first time doing an MC gig at a conference like this. And the things I've learned are you got to look after your voice. Because after, you'd be surprised how much talking you actually do over the 2 days. It's a lot of talking, even though you're not presenting. And my voice was wrecked on the second day. It was absolutely stuck. It might have been because I was also getting a cold, but it didn't help matters at all. But the other thing too is that if I had my time again, I would drop everything and prepare a lot earlier than I did. It's one of those things where, yeah, I think as an MD, you can't prepare enough for what you do. So that's what I'd probably do differently next time. And it was funny because Nicola did the Write the Docs Day MC duties last year, and she said the same thing. But until you actually do it, you don't understand how much earlier you need to prepare.
Yeah, I often find people will Google you and they read off something they find on the internet, and then you're standing there thinking, You found out that about me?
Well, I was smart. I asked everyone to give me the top 5 things that are interesting way in advance. So I used that to actually build my introduction of them, and that worked really well. So that would be a pro tip.
I think you're selling yourself far short here, Jared.
It was fun. I'd do it again, and they have that on record. So next year, you probably, if everyone, that's the other thing too, because it's weird. As an MC, you don't get included in any of the videos. There's no actual recorded evidence of what you do. So really, you can only see me live. It's live or nothing.
We have plenty of videos of you here. It's okay. It's okay. You get to MC here too.
That's true.
All right. So let's wrap that up. So people can find videos on the writethedocs.org / I
think it's the Write the Docs Australia
website. Yeah.
Yeah. The Write the Docs Australia one.
Just to recap a couple of other quick ones. So I have thankfully come to a long run of events myself. I've been on planes way too much. Fortunately, I'm in Europe where it's way easier. And not all of them are particularly relevant, but it's going to recap a couple that I think might fit into what we're talking about. Topping that would have been Write the Docs in Prague, which we didn't really recap. And it's a bit of a way ago now for me to remember exact details. Actually, on the subject of having people help you out, so there's a lot more kind of sub-organizers doing different roles, so much to the point that I know some of the main organizers are kind of having less and less to do, which is also a good thing. I did social media, which was a bit weird because, I don't know, half the time you don't really have that much to do because it's not the biggest conference in the world. There's only so much to say at once without just flooding people with too much information. But it was fun. I must admit, I was really depressed after it finished because it was such a nice feeling for a couple of days that when it was over, it was just a crash. Trying to think some talks that stood out for me. I think most of these are available as videos as well. Just having a quick look down the program. Don't say simply, this kind of concept of the words that can be patronizing to readers, which is something that I know technical writers often are arguing against with engineers about, including words like simply and just and things like that. Run your documentation was one I like. You know me, I like my kind of automated integrating development and doc stuff. That was kind of interesting. There was one. That was it. There was one that I always love, a history lesson. There was a talk from Tony Ibbs who did it on the history of markup languages, which I found quite fascinating. in a historical kind of way to learn how some of the languages some of the markup languages we now use got to where they are, and ones that fell by the wayside on the way. Just to quickly recap some other events I've been to that are somewhat connected. Let me think. So Sustain Summit in London. Sam from Write the Docs, who you don't often hear from because he's a little mic shy, but he's one of the main organizers, was also there. And it was about kind of sustaining open source, a sort of meta conference, I guess, around contributors, onboarding, documentation, finance models, things like that. That was in London. That was a really nice event, actually. And feeding into some of the other events I would like to mention, this thing came up quite a lot around a lot of open source projects now are getting much more into the space of understanding good onboarding and sustaining the project for making it understandable, which is quite interesting. And treating documentation more holistically. Like, I have actually started to refer to myself almost more as a developer experience person, someone who deals with onboarding for projects and things like that, especially the kind of work I deal with. And documentation is just one part of that. If you have good docs, but the application is kind of crappy, then it's, you're only sort of polishing something bad. So they kind of go hand in hand with each other, which I found interesting. One that doesn't seem to be in my list, but I've been working a lot more recently with in the Ethereum ecosystem. And that is an ecosystem that has acknowledged recently that also its documentation and onboarding for developers is very, very hard to understand and is suddenly employing a lot of tech writers. So it's suddenly been very busy. And there's been a couple of the big events in that space come up recently where everyone was talking about this subject, which is also good that developers and engineers and product people are talking about it as being very important.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
How many conferences do you attend every year?
I'll answer that question in 1 minute. I'm just gonna mention one more, and then I'll answer that question.
All right.
And then finally, kind of part of the broader the docs stable, but not part of the Write the Docs family. We have to be slightly careful here. There's the API the docs in London. I was on the selection committee for that, and that was interesting. Kind of certainly a very much of a subset of documentation. But that was also pretty busy. 2-day event, ran alongside DevRelCon, so Developer Relations Con in London. And again, slightly different crowd maybe, because APIs often sort of encompass more business people as well, because it's a monetization strategy. But it was also interesting. And different angles, but interesting. And I met bizarrely someone who replaced me as a tech writer at the company I used to work for, which is always interesting. The number of conferences I've been to this year, I don't know. I usually do my recap at the end of the year. It's been quite a lot, especially since September.
Ballpark estimate.
God.
I feel like I heard you say at one point in a post that you attend like 25 conferences a year. Is that too many?
Hang on. I'm actually doing a very quick count. I would probably say this year it has been more, maybe 40 or so.
40 conferences.
Yeah.
All right, we got to understand ridiculous. This.
I also go as press though. It's not always like, I mean, there aren't 40 tech writing conferences to go to, but also as a journalist, I'm going to do less next year. Actually, I'm going to be focusing a bit more. But sometimes they're just interesting, and in Europe, there's almost too many. I've been planning a blog post on this, that there's too many events and they're starting to dilute each other in some respects, especially in some cities like Berlin, Amsterdam. There's just too many.
They need to Voltron together. And
last week in Berlin, there were 3 alone with there were probably more than 3, but 3 in the tech space where the audience is crossed over. And why? I don't know why have so many in 1 week? Why not spread them out?
So why do you attend so many? Can you tell us what's pulling you to all these different conferences? I think last year I attended maybe 1, maybe none. I don't even. I 2 in 1 year is a lot for me.
I like to travel and I like to meet people. It's a way of doing that. I will often take a couple of days off either side of places to go and meet people and look around and interview people and things like that. I find them kind of interesting, even though I have towards the end got a little jaded with hearing some of the same things over and over again, especially on some of the more general technology ones. From the journalist side, it's kind of part of the job, and I've got to a point where some of them are actually paying for me to go, which makes it less of an issue, because why not? If someone's offering to send you somewhere, why not? Europe makes it way easier to travel as well. The longest trip I'll ever do here is maybe 3 hours from here to Lisbon, for example, the other side of Europe. That's probably the longest trip. So it's way easier to get around as well.
But I mean, each of these conferences, you said that they only pay for some of them, so you kind of pay your own entrance fee for a lot of these conferences.
No, not the entrance
and your own
fee.
travel.
Not the entrance fee, but travel. But I mean, European travel is fairly cheap, and like Swapnil, I work for myself, so it's a business expense.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting. I don't have a family, so well, I do actually. My wife comes with me sometimes, but I don't have family that needs looking after so much. I only have adult family. So, but
yeah, I find that when I'm out of town for like 4 to 5 days, it's like hugely disruptive, right? Because my wife has to play double parent. I mean, she already does, but even more so, right? And it's just kind of disruptive. I do like going to conferences and meeting people and hearing new ideas, but I also kind of think that there are a lot of ways to discover new ideas outside of conferences that maybe often get overlooked. But It's cool. I mean, and I see that since you're in your own business and do a lot of freelance writing, I can see how that would tie into the conference attending and travel and write-ups and other things. So that's cool. I mean, hats off to you. I think it's great. I just it's such a different I don't know, way of living.
I've had enough this year. I got back after the last trip. I had enough, actually. I think a little bit is wondering we might move back to Australia in the next couple of years, and then when you're in Australia, you're a bit stuck. So I kind of want to make the most of being here in the interim as well. So
you certainly can't flit around to all the European conferences very easily from down here. It's an easy 18-hour flight over to Europe. So, you know,
that's a short flight. I don't know where you're going.
Yeah, you're probably right there. It's a gross underestimation.
All right. And actually, just one last one on that. So today is officially the deadline, but I am running again the Tool the Docs dev room at FOSDEM, which is a huge open source, great fun, crazy open source event in Brussels in February. The CFP actually closes today, but I'm sure you could sneak one or two in. Message me on Slack if the system doesn't let you, because I have this weird automated system. So maybe it won't let you, but just message me on Slack if you are interested in submitting something. And every talk was full last year, if that's any incentive. And the conference is free. It's in Brussels at probably the worst weather of the year, but still it's Brussels, which is nice beer and chocolate. So that's a consolidation. Yum. Yeah. We apologize for having this slightly rambling talk. I'm not entirely sure what happened to our guest. We will find out soon, maybe
some other time. There's always next time. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll have maybe like an end of year show before we finish for the year. I hope we'll have another one, not on the 25th of December, I don't think, but
no.
At some point maybe. We'll see how we go. But yeah, in the meantime, has anyone got any final projects, blog posts, meetups they would like to mention?
I've got a blog post I've been working on. This is one that it's sort of the basis for presentations that I'm giving, but it's on how to be both a generalist and a specialist through developing technical acuity. It's like a 7,000 word blog post, and I'm going to publish it this coming week. So check it out at I'dratherbe.writing.com.
Jared?
I've got nothing. I might do some blog posts or something about Write the Docs Australia, but at the moment the work's kind of like filling every spare available moment of my time. So I think I'll see how I go. I'll play it by ear, but I would like to do some write-ups of Write the Docs, because it was good. It was a good conference.
I think the only other thing I have to mention is if you are somewhat new to this community and are looking to maybe have some sort of starting work in the space, I'm currently working on several projects where I need writers. I need so many writers paid by the article. So if you want to, if you're interested in writing about JavaScript, or if you're interested in writing about blockchain, I
knew you were going to say blockchain. I knew it.
Yeah, so, it was inevitable.
Yeah. If you're looking to get some kind of freelance work into space and start your portfolio, then send me a message. I'll help you write your pieces and you'll get paid. So perfect kind of first steps. If you're interested, let me know. But in the meantime, and in the interim, somewhere the page with all the details has vanished from my web browser. So where's it gone? Hang on. Whoa. Give me a second. Seamless. We're absolute professionals here. Where's it gone?
It wouldn't be a Write the Docs podcast episode without some shenanigans.
Why it's not showing up here anymore?
Yeah, what are the feedback? I do get some feedback for the show, and one of the interesting feedback items is people actually like the awkwardness.
I actually really don't think it shows that bad in some of the ones.
No.
But anyway,
I think it's just the awkward pauses. The awkward pauses from the time delay, I think, sometimes make people laugh.
We don't edit. People, I don't know if people realize that we do not edit at all. So.
No, one take one at a time. That's how it works. It's the way to do it.
To be fair, in 18 episodes, sorry, not 9. Where did I get 19 from? 18 or 19 episodes is the first time we've had a non-appearance. So we've done pretty well. So, but if you are interested in finding out more, you can find previous episodes and notes at podcast.writethedocs.org. You can find our contact details on the contact the hosts link there. You can also talk to us on the podcast channel of the Write the Docs Slack. If you're interested in speaking or proposing speakers, we'd love to hear from you, especially people from different parts of the world. We would love to hear from them. So in the meantime, thanks for joining us for this slightly random show, and I will pass over to Jared for the immortal final words.
Docs, or it didn't happen.